Out of the wilds of ancient Greece, a magnificent empire arose, the heroic vision of one man. In just 13 years, he swallowed up most of the Western world and pushed deep into uncharted territory. He crushed the mightiest powers on earth and was hailed a king, an emperor, even a god. The first true conqueror, Alexander the Great, paved the road to glory. On a brisk autumn morning in 331 BC, a small but valiant band of warriors prepares for battle. Their enemy, an army 5 times their size and the most powerful force on earth, the Persian Empire. Their leader, Alexander, the fair-haired king of Macedonia, is barely 26 years old. For the last 4 years, he has led his troops from Greece to Egypt and conquered half the known world. But today, his men are uneasy. Already tired and homesick after a 2,000-mile crusade, they now face staggering odds. Still, Alexander is convinced this will be their finest hour. "You are Macedonians," he cries, "protected by Zeus." Alexander was born to conquer. The son of a warrior king, he is heir to a powerful throne. His father, Philip of Macedon, was the first to unite Greece's fiercely independent city-states after a century of bitter infighting. Alexander has to be tough enough to not only defend this new kingdom, but to avenge his country's honor. At his rugged outpost in Macedonia, Philip harbors a dream cherished by all Greeks. Across the Aegean Sea in Anatolia, now modern Turkey, the long-despised Persian Empire occupies several revered Greek cities, including the birthplaces of Aesop, Pythagoras, and Homer. Philip is determined to punish the Persians for their invasion of Greece 150 years earlier by driving them out. With such ambitions, a father must forge in his son a spirit as strong as iron. But Philip also knows that a ruler has to have brains as well as brawn. He brings none other than the celebrated philosopher Aristotle from Athens to teach Alexander how to observe, reason, and think ahead. His lessons will make Alexander the first great strategist in military history. But it's an epic poem that fires the boy's imagination. Homer's The Iliad, an account of the Trojan Wars, is mythology with a message. In it, the Greek hero Achilles wins a bloody victory over Hector at the city of Troy. But Achilles is no brute. After the battle, he shows compassion by returning the body of his dead foe to his father, King Priam. Might tempered by mercy is an idea not lost on the young Alexander. For the rest of his life, he will carry a copy of the Iliad wherever he goes. And Achilles, brave, fearless, the paragon of virtue, will become his role model and hero. Alexander's obsession with the mythological Achilles pleases his mother, Queen Olympias. A religious fanatic, she's convinced that Zeus, the king of the gods, and a notorious womanizer, actually seduced her. Sexual intercourse between humans and gods is not unusual in Greek mythology. This time, rumor has it, the result is none other than the child, Alexander. Whether half god, half man, human or divine, Alexander still has to prove himself to mere mortals. Though small in stature, Alexander is a gifted athlete and a fierce competitor. Proud to the point of vanity, he declares he will only race against other kings. He is also charming and charismatic and attracts friends who will remain loyal to him for life. His favorite is Hephaestion. In an age when homosexuality is openly practiced, Hephaestion will become Alexander's constant companion and lover. One other relationship from his childhood will endure. When he was 12 years old, Alexander had his first glimpse of a horse named Bucephalus. Spirited and lightning quick, the horse is considered untamable. Determined to break him, Alexander notices something everyone else has missed. Bucephalus is afraid of his own shadow. To gain his trust, Alexander points the horse's head into the sun to make the shadow disappear. From that moment on, the two will form a lifelong bond. And Bucephalus will become one of the most famous horses in history. Delighted by his son's ingenuity, Philip observes that Macedonia can't hold on to such a prince for long. By the time he's 20, Alexander has already gone with his father on several campaigns to strengthen Macedonian rule over the rest of Greece. Along the way, he's learned to command the movements and the respect of the men. With a promising young general at his side and a united kingdom behind him, Philip is now ready to attack Persia, an empire 40 times larger than his own. While an advance guard sets sail for Anatolia, Philip stays behind to attend the wedding of his daughter, a union that will ensure peace with a neighboring kingdom. But trouble is brewing. On his way to the ceremony, Philip notices an old acquaintance, a former bodyguard. The king is greeted with a dagger to the ribs. Quickly, soldiers surround the young prince to protect him. Others chase down the assassin and kill him. But who was behind the murder? Earlier, Philip had taken a new queen, and many suspect his estranged wife, Olympias, sought revenge. But the truth will die with the king. In the chaotic weeks that follow, Alexander moves swiftly and decisively to assure his succession. Following the custom of the times, he purges the court of enemies and contenders for the throne, including an infant half-brother, leaving no doubt who Philip's rightful heir is. But this king will have to fight to hold on to his crown. Before it's secure, an ocean of blood will be spilled. In a crucible of fire, Philip forged Alexander's spirit, but the young king is hardly a carbon copy of his father. Wily and often crude, Philip had ruled Greece with an iron fist, but his son, educated like a Greek, is more refined. Only 21 years old when he ascends the throne in 336 BC, many question if Alexander has the stuff of warriors. But when a false rumor sweeps through Greece that he's been killed, it ignites a revolt against the new Macedonian ruler. As a warning to other Greeks, Alexander marches south to Thebes, the hotbed of the rebellion. There he strikes ruthlessly. His army sacks the city, massacres 6,000 people, and sells 30,000 more into slavery. The news spreads quickly. Alexander's conquest even reaches the oracle at Delphi, who declares him invincible. By the time Alexander arrives in Athens, no one dares oppose him. But instead of punishing his enemies, he offers them a proposition. If all of Greece will band together and provide him with soldiers, ships, and supplies, he will fulfill their dream and launch a war to liberate the Greek cities in Anatolia, occupied by the Persians. In 334 BC, with an army of 45,000 and his boyhood friend Hephaestion by his side, Alexander embarks on a historic crusade, the conquest of a continent. After crossing the Balkan hills, Alexander heads for the narrow stretch of water that separates Europe from Asia, then known as the Hellespont. As he wades ashore, he vows that all of Asia will be won by his spear. He will never set foot in his homeland again. To ensure the success of his heroic quest, Alexander makes a pilgrimage to the nearby ruins of the fallen city of Troy and the tomb of Achilles. To the Greek hero, he offers up prayers and gifts, but he takes something too: Achilles' shield for good luck in battle. His first chance to brandish it comes unexpectedly soon. At the river Granicus, he spies the army of a local governor, 40,000 Persian troops. Instead of waiting for the next day, as his generals suggest, Alexander decides to attack immediately with a frontal assault across the river. Fighting shoulder to shoulder with his men, Alexander plunges into the thick of the battle. An enemy axe even splits his helmet in two, but the Persians suffer far worse. Stunned and disheartened by the surprise attack, they lose a third of their men before fleeing the field. Over the next few weeks, Alexander marches nearly 1,000 miles through Anatolia, liberating the Greeks. City after city throws open its gates. With Greece once again reunited, his father's greatest dream has finally come true. But 2,000 miles away, in Persepolis, the capital of Persia, the emperor Darius is stinging from the defeat. Now it's up to him to stop the audacious young king. Anxious to destroy Alexander, Darius assembles an army of up to 100,000 and invites his court, including his wife, children, and his mother, to come along and savor his victory. With an army half the size of the Persians, Alexander continues his push through Anatolia. The two armies converge at Issus, and the battle lines are drawn. Cramped between the mountains and the sea, Issus suits the Macedonians perfectly. Here, the Persians will be unable to take advantage of their superior numbers. The centerpiece of Alexander's fighting machine is a formation called a phalanx. In tightly knit blocks, foot soldiers wield 18-foot lances tipped in bronze, called sarissas. As each rank lowers its line of sarissas, it creates a deadly wall of spikes. So massive are the weapons, it takes two hands to control them. But their weight also gives the warriors tremendous momentum as they advance. Virtually nothing can stop them. By comparison, Persian spears are just 5 feet long. With the Macedonian cavalry engaged on both flanks, Alexander sends his phalanxes straight into the center of the Persian lines. Trapped from behind by their own men, row after row of hapless Persians are impaled. Their lines fall in bloody ribbons before the Macedonian onslaught. Seeing the day is lost, Darius commits the unforgivable. He deserts his post and flees. Alexander goes after him, but Darius gets away. Though renowned for being just and wise, Alexander hates a coward. He swears to hunt the fugitive down. But the field is not the only thing the Persian king abandons. His family has also been left behind. His wife and mother throw themselves at the mercy of their conqueror, but they mistake the taller Hephaestion for the king. Alexander takes pity on the mother. Captive women are often raped and sold into slavery. Instead, he offers her a place in his entourage. In the days ahead, she personally takes charge of his food and comfort and becomes one of his most loyal subjects. Alexander believes that a leader should be one with his men, sharing both their pain and the spoils of war. If his bravery in battle wins their respect, his compassion and generosity inspires their devotion. They would follow him to the ends of the earth, and soon he will lead them there. Barely more than a year has passed since the start of his campaign, and already Alexander has accomplished all that he set out to do. But new territory beckons. He plans to march south to the land of the pharaohs and to honor and glory never before seen in the ancient world. At age 23, Alexander, king of Macedonia, has driven the Persians out of the entire Mediterranean. Now he can return home to a life of comfort and ease. Instead, he chooses a soldier's life and pushes ever deeper into the Persian Empire. After the battle at Issus, Alexander traveled 500 miles along the coast, through Palestine, across the desert, and is now poised to take Egypt. Sailing down the Nile, he gazes upon a civilization that is already 2,000 years old. Wherever he goes, Alexander is embraced by the Egyptians as the great deliverer. Linked by years of Persian oppression, Greece and Egypt are at last united under a single sovereign. In 331 BC, at Memphis, Egypt's capital, Alexander is proclaimed pharaoh. His empire now covers nearly 500,000 square miles. Because his new subjects believe pharaohs are descended from gods, Alexander is regarded as divine. But Alexander has other, more practical ambitions. The Nile is the gateway to Africa. Here, where it flows into the Mediterranean, he will build a great city in the Greek style. He draws the city limits and the positions of the main buildings himself. As in Greece, the streets will be laid out on a grid. Theaters, stadiums, temples, and assembly halls will be virtual monuments to his homeland. When he runs out of chalk, he resorts to barley. Birds that come to feed on the grain are considered a good sign. The city will prosper and be a sanctuary for strangers. He calls it Alexandria. Over the next few years, he will christen a dozen more like it throughout the Middle East. Each of them is a miniature Greece transplanted to alien soil. But this Alexandria will be his best and most enduring. As construction gets underway, Alexander leaves behind architects and engineers and embarks on an extraordinary personal pilgrimage. Riding west under the searing Egyptian sun, he makes a near suicidal trek through 300 miles of one of the most hostile deserts on Earth. Secretly, he has resolved to invade the Persian homeland. But before he takes his army into harm's way, he seeks the advice of the gods. After 14 days, exhausted to the point of collapse, he arrives at an isolated oasis called Siwa. At the Temple of Ammon, legend says, Alexander received a divine revelation which he never divulged. The priests now acknowledge him the son of the god of gods, Zeus. Alexander is eager to invade, for who can stop one so favored by the gods? Back in Persia, his palace empty of family and friends, the fugitive King Darius hopes for a political solution. He offers to ransom his family with a peace treaty, gold, the hand of his daughter in marriage, and all the lands west of the Euphrates River. His offer is generous. The Greeks can return home conquering heroes with an empire stretching from the Balkans to Libya and as far east as the Euphrates. One of Alexander's most experienced generals, Parmenion, is delighted by the terms. If I was Alexander, he urges, I would accept the truce and end the war without further risk. So would I, Alexander scoffs, if I was Parmenion. Many of his men begin to wonder if their leader has finally gone too far. He's gambling all they won against the weight of the Persian Empire. When the armies meet, the battle will be fought by nearly 400,000 men. But it will hinge on the courage of only one. A year has passed since Alexander's victory at Issus. Camped in Mesopotamia, his men while away the time competing in sports to keep their edge. Behind the scenes, their leader is making plans. Alexander has rejected Darius's offer of ransom, setting the two adversaries on a collision course. The Persian king has little choice but to prepare for a decisive confrontation. Summoning all his troops from as far away as India and Afghanistan, he forms one vast imperial army of 300,000 men. This time, Alexander doesn't rush into a hasty attack. He waits for his men to prepare themselves and for the Persian to make his move. Only when Darius advances does Alexander march to meet him. The two armies converge at a place called Gorgamila. Remembering the lesson of Issus, Darius is determined not to cripple his superior numbers by being forced to fight on uneven ground. He sets his sights on a large flat plain near the shores of the Tigris River, where he can wield his newest weapon. Chariots with wheels bearing scythes designed to cut down the Macedonian phalanxes. Scouts sent by Alexander to the Persian camp witness another terrifying sight. 100,000 campfires sparkle like a city. Based on the scouts' report, Alexander is urged to launch a night attack to catch the enemy by surprise. It's no honor to steal a victory, he replies. But when rumor spreads of the size of the Persian army, panic sweeps through the camp. They are outnumbered 5 to 1. Alexander's pride has brought them too far from home, his men grumble. After 3 years and 2,000 miles, he's delivered them to a desolate land where they face certain annihilation. Alexander goes out among his men to bolster their courage and to remind them they are protected by Zeus. Later, he reviews his battle plan with his generals. They will confront Darius in one massive assault using classical Macedonian tactics. In the morning, as the men prepare for battle, most think this day will be their last. But with his copy of the Iliad by his side, Alexander oversleeps. When he's roused, he announces the battle is already won. On the 20th of September, 331 BC, Alexander's forces, some 50,000 strong, march on the full might of the Persian Empire. As the armies draw near, Alexander swings his troops into a diagonal line across the battlefield. After years of waiting, these two bitter rivals are finally poised for the ultimate showdown. If Darius has put his faith in numbers, Alexander will rely on strategy. He begins by ordering his right flank to advance to the far right, drawing the battle away from the infantry in the center of the field. He appears to be trying to outflank the Persians. To meet the advance, Darius sends his cavalry to his left. Then Darius unleashes his chariots on the Macedonian phalanxes in the center. But the Greeks simply part into islands, and the chariots charge through harmlessly. Meanwhile, Alexander's left flank, commanded by Parmenion, has engaged the mass of Darius's men and is gradually being worn down by the sheer weight of numbers. Though they are taking heavy casualties, they miraculously manage to hold the line. Alexander's strategy has forced Darius to spread his ranks out to the left and right, effectively weakening the center where the emperor is undefended. Seizing the moment, Alexander signals his troops to turn and charge straight at Darius. Realizing that he is in grave danger, Darius once again loses his nerve. He turns and runs. This time, Alexander is not going to let the coward get away. But just as Darius is within reach, Alexander receives an urgent plea for help from Parmenion, who is being overrun. Darius's capture again has to wait. Abandoned by their king, the Persians can find no reason to continue fighting. The victory belongs to Alexander. The Battle of Gorgamila is one of the most remarkable engagements in military history. Alexander had calculated that despite odds heavily favoring the Persians, the outcome would hinge on Darius's personal courage. Before the day is out, Greeks and Persians alike will hail Alexander as King of Asia. If the spirit of Achilles had risen up and fought beside them, the Greeks could not have won a more glorious victory. Heralds and chroniclers carry the news to the four corners of the civilized world. But for Alexander, it's still not enough. Now he must conquer Persia itself. By age 25, Alexander has defeated the largest and most powerful empire of its time, avenged 100 years of tyranny, and been proclaimed king of Macedonia, Greece, Palestine, Egypt, and Asia. In the weeks following Gorgamila, Alexander marches to Babylon, then deep into Persia, to the great fortress city of Persepolis. At last he stands at the very heart of the empire that for more than a century has kept the Mediterranean under its yoke. But the civilization the Greeks scorn as barbaric is actually more advanced and sophisticated than their own. Before their eyes glitter magnificent palaces, ornate statuary, and gold. The Persians greet their new ruler with awe and tribute. City after city pours forth its riches, and each individual treasury contains more gold than all of Greece's combined. In Persepolis alone, Alexander reaps 120,000 talents of gold. In today's terms, about $60 billion. He gives much of it to his generals and the soldiers who marched with him all the way from Macedonia. Still, when the final accounting is done, he is the richest man in the world, probably the richest man in history. At the Persian court, his new subjects treat him with respect and courtesy. He wisely retains Persian governors to administer his expanding empire, which now stretches across 1.5 million square miles. He dons lavish Persian robes and permits all who approach him to bow in the Persian manner. But his men are disgusted and grow weary of these strange new customs. After 4 long years of campaigning, his troops are eager to go home. Fabulously wealthy, they will be celebrated heroes in Greece. But Alexander has unfinished business. Besides, his Persian empire stretches as far to the east as it does to the west. He wants to lay claim to the rest of what is rightfully his. On the eve of the expedition, Alexander lets loose his final revenge on the Persians who sacked and torched Athens a century and a half ago. His men set the palaces and great halls of Persepolis ablaze, reducing to ruins one of the architectural wonders of the ancient world. Pushing east once more, Alexander learns that Darius has been captured by Persian conspirators and is being held prisoner. On information gathered from spies, he tracks him 600 miles to the south coast of the Caspian Sea. By the time they get there, the camp is deserted. Nothing remains but a heap of discarded clothes. Beneath it, Alexander discovers Darius. Murdered and his body abandoned, his death ended the reign of the last Persian king to claim dominion over half the world. Believing that even for a coward there is honor in death, Alexander has Darius's body taken to the tombs of the Persian kings near Persepolis. Only now does he truly believe he is king of Asia. With Darius gone, Alexander can now consolidate his empire. As he moves east, he will go where no Greek has ever gone before. His caravan is breathtaking. Behind the army follows a virtual city of administrators, craftsmen, bakers, butchers, actors, blacksmiths, architects, and builders. Not to mention Darius's mother, the palace harem, and the entire treasury of the Persian Empire. Alexander leads them east through Afghanistan and on towards the mountains bordering India. Where there are no passes, his mobile city must scale sheer cliffs and negotiate treacherous ravines. Hundreds die in accidents or from guerrilla attacks by local tribesmen. Guerrilla warfare is new to the Greeks, but one by one the tribes are subdued by Alexander's remarkable ability to adapt his tactics to new conditions. In one surprise move, he takes a bride. Although Alexander remains devoted to Hephaestion, he marries Roxanne, the beautiful daughter of a local chieftain. While the union serves to cement his relationship with the tribe, genuine affection blossoms between the pair. Alexander's conquest goes far beyond subjugation. He intends to colonize the East. Using the vast resources of his treasury, he builds 10 cities throughout Persia, Afghanistan, Turkestan, and India. In each, he leaves contingents of his entourage, planting seeds of Greek civilization thousands of miles from the Aegean Sea. Only one setback mars the campaign. In the mountains, bandits raid the royal stable and capture several horses, including Alexander's beloved steed, Bucephalus. Distraught by the loss, Alexander threatens to lay waste to the entire area unless the animal is brought back. The message is relayed throughout the countryside, and soon the thieves appear with the horse. Alexander is so happy to see Bucephalus that instead of punishing the thieves, he rewards them. But to his war-weary men who clamor to go home, he turns a deaf ear. Through the Swat Valley and on into India in the winter of 327 BC, their complaints grow louder with every step. Still, they trudge on. They have now covered nearly 8,000 miles since leaving Macedonia and traveled farther east than any European before them. They have marveled at the unbridled riches of the Indian Rajas and wondered at the strange rituals of the Hindus. His troops, now some 100,000 strong, meet little resistance. The only serious attempt to stop them is made at the river Hydaspes, but a squadron of 200 war elephants is defeated by the battle-hardened imperial army. Despite heavy losses, Alexander drives his men on. His goal, to set foot in a mythical world ocean somewhere to the east. With no maps to guide them, the Macedonians are blind to the vastness that lies before them. Beyond the jungle awaits the unknown. The incessant rains of the monsoon are the last straw. They refuse to go further. When, after 3 days, Alexander grudgingly agrees to lead them home, a cheer goes up. Alexander has allowed no one to defeat him except us. On the return, the expedition travels down the Indus River, then splits into 2 groups. The first sails across the Indian Ocean and into the Persian Gulf. The other takes a dangerous route through the desert. Tragically, the monsoon prevents Alexander's fleet from bringing supplies. Here, under a hot Arabian sun, 3/4 of his army will die of starvation. The king suffers the same agonies as his men and shares equally the dwindling provisions. After 2 months, against all odds, Alexander miraculously emerges from the desert. In 324 BC, 3 years after the expedition set off, he delivers the ragged remnants of his army back to Persia. When word of Alexander's exploits reaches Greece, some call him an adventurer, others a god. But soon the legend begins to grow. His wealth and fame are unparalleled, his vision bold, his courage inhuman. From Athens to India, he is becoming a hero of mythic proportions. But now, at the height of his glory, fortune abandons him. His destiny fulfilled, he loses his lifelong companion. During a round of games arranged to celebrate Alexander's safe return, Hephaestion contracts a fever. As the games proceed, his condition worsens. Alexander is at the stadium watching boys race, a poignant reminder, perhaps, of time spent with his childhood friend, when word arrives that Hephaestion is dead. By the time he reaches his lover's bedside, grief overtakes him. For 4 days and nights, he will not leave the dead man's side. He indulges in a deep and terrible mourning that lasts half a year. Where now is the spirit of Achilles? The death of his friend rouses him to what he hopes will be his finest hour. After months spent consolidating the empire and reorganizing his army, Alexander sets in motion the plans for a new invasion. This time he will expand his empire to the west by leading an assault into Arabia, North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. But before he can begin his next conquest, disaster finds the indestructible Alexander's Achilles heel. The man who has survived countless life-threatening battle wounds is struck down by a common disease, malaria. For days, between bouts of pain and a soaring temperature, Alexander meets with his generals to discuss plans for the invasion of Arabia. But as the end draws near, his men break down and weep. As Alexander's officers file past, each asks, "Who do you give the empire to?" "The strongest," is his enigmatic reply. But who among them could approach such genius and daring, or inspire such loyalty? When Darius's mother saw the life ebb from her sovereign, she turned her face to the wall and starved herself to death. Alexander died on June 10th, 323 BC. After 13 years of fighting, he had conquered 2 million square miles. But without his force of will and charisma to hold the empire together, it eventually began to crumble, torn apart by the squabbling of rival generals and petty kings. His body was taken to Egypt, to the city that bears his name. Just as he once made the pilgrimage to the tomb of Achilles, his own grave would become a shrine. On the road to world conquest, Caesar and Napoleon would pay homage to the brilliant young general who set the standard for all future conquerors. From the Aegean to Afghanistan, he had marched 22,000 miles and never lost a battle. He planted the seeds of a culture full of vitality and new ideas, and left in his wake the roots of a new civilization. Builder of cities, warrior, emperor, hero, God. 2,300 years later, his name still carries thunder. Alexander the Great.